Great. We're good.
All set? Oh, got one more person, Alex. Oh, you got it. Okay. Ready, Katie?
Yes, go ahead. Thanks.
All right. Hey, folks. Thanks for taking time to join us today. This is our overall abandoned and derelict vessel work group. We had our first meeting to kick off this initiative on January 5th, and then we broke into subcommittees based on several important issues related to this task at hand. The first was February 10th of a law and policy subcommittee. Then February 19th, we had our funding subcommittee, and then we had on February 22nd, our removal committee, and we're about to schedule, I believe tomorrow morning is going to be the first outreach and education subcommittee. So we really look to divide and conquer with these tasks. A lot of the big lift is going to come from each of those subcommittees, while Katie and I are doing a lot of background work as co-facilitators and research. As a matter of introduction for myself, I'm a coastal planner with the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. So we are co-facilitating with Katie, registered here of Clean Virginia Waterways of Longwood University. So we've brought together a great group of folks from the private sector, some POERs, state and federal agencies, and marina owners, and other interested parties to really put our heads together and tackle this issue of ADVs. So really just some updates from these previous meetings very briefly, as we want to reserve most of the time for some of our guest speakers here from other states to share lessons learned, and then open up the floor for some discussion here, including part of our Virginia marine debris reduction plan that we're working on currently, concurrently rather. So really just some of the big things that came out of these meetings were from the policy and law subcommittee region. It's just understanding where jurisdictions overlap, where they stop in terms of removing vessels, and the funding to go along with that. We understand that there's a lack of funding for a lot of these things, from pollution to actual vessel removal, which can be quite expensive. But there's also costs that are incurred by marinas and other entities just having the opportunity cost of a slip being tied up, and property values, that sort of thing. There's certainly navigational and a safety component that's really important. And then we also have areas where insurance is a big thing, and lack of coverage, and lack of owner accountability. The process of titling and tracking down ownership is a really key thing that we're looking to solve. So what you'll see come out of this overall work group meeting are these updates from all the subcommittees. And then to have sort of some next steps going forward. We're assisted with the Virginia Coastal Policy Center at William & Mary Law School. Some folks are working on some great policy and background research, again, looking at other states, looking at our existing laws, and trying to come up with some recommendations. But our other subcommittees are hard at work coming up with their sort of list of topics, and we'll kind of circulate those through these larger work group meetings. So as one more thing here, as a matter of background and what we're working on as sort of the planning team, I'm working on an inventory of these vessels, starting with a list I got from the Coast Guard a couple of weeks ago. It's about 170 vessels just in coastal waters since 2013 that they've cataloged. And we've had some other folks fill out a Google Forms survey that I've been able to kind of work and add to that list. We've got probably about a dozen responses there from some marina owners and other interested parties. So we're working to build that list, get that number, start looking at the costs, and then kind of start to prioritize some of the removal under the existing policy jurisdiction regime, and then if there's other changes as necessary to that going forward. So we'll have some case studies as well. That'll be sort of final report coming up late spring here, but I will turn it over to Katie for next steps on the agenda. Thank you all.
Great, thank you. Could you actually share the agenda on your screen yet? Thanks.
Let me go ahead and do that.
While he's bringing that up, I wanted to remind everybody that all of the meetings, all the subcommittee meetings are recorded. They're on the Clean Virginia Waterways YouTube channel. And if you go to the Clean Virginia Waterways website that's devoted to this work group, you can find links to those videos, and you can also read summary notes that are written by Jeff Flood and Mitchell Sherry, who is an intern for Clean Virginia Waterways this semester. And I put that address in the chat box, so you can, anytime you want, you can see what the subcommittees are up to. And a reminder for those of you who joined us late, please go ahead and put your name and organization in the webinar chat box. We appreciate that. So basically, as Jeff just said, we been off to a really roaring start, considering our first meeting was in January, and as of tomorrow, all the subcommittees will have had their first meetings. But a big part of this program is going to be the white paper, the policy paper that is being prepared for us through the Virginia Coastal Policy Center, which is at William and Mary. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to that team and get an update from them on where they are with that policy paper. And after they give us an update, we can do a little question and answers. And then we're going to be hearing from Evan Ridley, who is with the Rhode Island Recycling Pilot Program, which we're really excited about. And then we're going to hear from Dorothy Deal in Oregon about their lessons learned. And then finally, we're going to end this meeting today talking about the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan, how it relates to ADVs. So at this point, let's turn it over to William and Mary, please.
Hi, everybody. This is Anthony Cassato, Virginia Coastal Policy Center. Let me know if anyone can't hear me or anything. So yeah, we are working. We're working on this white paper, and so far, I've had a chance to sit in on both the law and policy subgroup and the funding subgroup, and so we're generally my goal with this this paper is to kind of combine those two groups into kind of a picture of what Virginia has now in terms of ADV regulations and funding, and then look to other states. Currently, my list of states I want to cover is Florida, North Carolina, California, Oregon, and possibly Maryland. If for nothing else, then they have a funding thing I want to talk about. If anybody has suggestions on other programs or from other states that I should look into, feel free to let me know. I will put my email in the chat here when I'm finished speaking, so you can email me directly about it. And then we're going to go into kind of the funding situation. A little bit of a kind of a summary of what I think we'll be talking about in the funding subgroup. If you haven't seen that meeting, we'll be going into like how where Virginia can get more funds to do this, like what are the options available, the pros and cons of some of them, and then we'll be making some recommendations about what we think the best what the best combination of policy and funding options are going forward. A little too early to say what exactly those recommendations are right now, but that is generally what we're working on. I know we're pretty tight on time. If anybody has any specific questions right now, feel free to let me know.
Great. Does anyone have any questions for Anthony? All right. Well, we're all super excited about the work you're doing.
And I'm going to put my email in the chat here. If anybody has anything they want to, send me or something they think I should consider, feel free to email me directly. All right.
Great.
So thanks.
Well, thank you. And you'll be with us the whole call today, right? In case somebody figures that question later. Great.
I will be here. And Jesse will be here as well if I can't answer.
Okay. Marvelous. Yeah, and just a reminder too, that all of the subcommittee meetings are open to anyone who wants to either observe or participate. The dates are set for the subcommittee meetings based on the availability of some core people who have signed up. But once the date is set, we share it widely. In fact, as Jeff mentioned, the next meeting will be tomorrow of the Prevention or Education and Outreach Committee, and that's going to be when is that, Jeff? 11:30.
11:30 to 12:30, I believe. I'm double checking.
Okay, right. So we will share that through an email. We do not post Zoom links on our website. Those only will come to you through emails. So if you're interested in that committee, we will get an email out this afternoon, so everybody will have the link to that meeting. Well, at this point, then let's turn it over to one of the exciting topics. Rhode Island has actually been working on recycling or looking, not really recycling, but looking at a disposal option for fiberglass hulls. And Evan, I gave you co-host abilities if you want to share your screen with us. And I'll let you introduce yourself in terms of your position and the history of this project.
Thanks, Katie, so much for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. I'll just say right off the bat, it's always encouraging to be with a group of folks that are working proactively on topics related to abandoned derelict vessel management, and seeing the diversity and representation across folks in academia at the state level and beyond is I think really something that is always encouraging to be a part of. So thank you for the chance to be here this morning to tell you a little bit about what Rhode Island has been up to along the lines of evaluating landfill alternatives for end-of-life fiberglass boats. I think it's safe to say that abandonment and dereliction could be seen in some ways as a symptom of a larger reality that I think we're all aware of, and that's really facing the limited infrastructure and options for managing the materials that come from boats when they reach the end of their natural lifespan on the water. Obviously, as a material bank, modern recreational boats have a lot of traditionally recyclable materials, metals, woods, fabrics, a lot of salvageable components, things that can be scrapped and recouped for value. However, the composites and some of the ancillary construction components, hull materials, those have always prevented boats from really being a truly recyclable product. And so in evaluating the limitations that are going to continue to grow with the respect to landfilling, especially in the Northeast, we were motivated by our industry partners and the members of the Rhode Island Marine Trades Association to see if Rhode Island, within its sort of small laboratory capacity, could identify, evaluate, and ultimately report out on experiences related to landfill alternative, which we did identify. So what I'd like to do in the next few minutes is just give you a little background on that process, some of the partners that we've engaged, what that recycling process looks like for the boats that we've taken in during our pilot, and some of the next steps that we perceive around sort of collective opportunities and challenges when it comes to dealing with these boats. And happy to answer any questions as we move forward. And I'll put some slides up on the screen here. So this got started back in 2015, really as a research initiative at Rhode Island Sea Grant, which is based at the Graduate School of Oceanography at URI. There was some initial support to basically, go out and identify what alternatives to landfilling might exist and what alternatives might be feasible to attempt to adapt in sort of the marine industry context. Very early on, we were connected with a company called Geocycle, a subsidiary of Lafarge Holcim, one of the largest cement manufacturers in the world, who really specialize in taking hard to manage, hard to recycle solid waste and use that material to capture both thermal energy replacement value as well as raw replacement value for the manufacturing of cement. So a little bit about how this works. Cement making requires a lot of heat and energy to power a rotating kiln that contains raw materials that, when heated, aggregate, turn into large chunks. Those chunks get broken down and bagged up into cement that you might see, at a Home Depot or something along those lines. The cement is really the glue that goes into any concrete additive or concrete mixture that you might see in construction or a lot of other common places. But that process is, as I mentioned, really energy intensive. And so this attempt to bring in alternative fuels and alternative raw materials is really an effort not only to reduce the amount of fossil fuel consumed in the cement making process, taken from things like coal and natural gas, but it's also a chance to really deviate from some of the raw materials that have to be mined, and extracted through quarrying, things like sand and limestone. And so fiberglass is really interesting because of the dual values it presents to cement manufacturers. One, you've got a polymer plastic-based resin that when introduced into a kiln can create thermal energy, BTUs per pound, that help offset the consumption of coal or natural gas, thereby reducing the emissions of CO2 associated with each ton of concrete, or excuse me, cement produced. And the glass fiber itself, because of its chemical composition, the silica, the calcium, the alumina that's present there, it really mimics and is compatible with the raw ingredients that are represented by the sand and limestone in that process. And so what you have at the end of the day is a contribution that not only reduces the energy consumption footprint, but also folds into the finished product in a way that does not diminish quality and is really indistinguishable from material that's produced with traditional sources. It's important to note that this really is different from waste to energy incineration, which may ring a few bells for people when thinking about something like this. We're different in the sense that co-processing really encapsulates and utilizes the core constituent values of that material. And so there is no byproduct left over, no sort of additive or issue that you have to handle when that cement is produced. It's really indistinguishable from that original product, and is able to again have an impact on the footprint of the producer. So the cement industry was our outlet, and knowing that we had that outlet, we were able to build a logistic process with partners in Rhode Island to complete specific recycling activities at the sort of discretion and guidance of GeoCycle, our end user, and having some of that initial technical verification under our belts that this material could be implemented, that it was of value. That was really our call to arms for the industry. And so we were able to generate significant support from folks like Boat US, from Brunswick, from the 11th Hour Racing Foundation, to really report out on our experiences, and at the same time try to double down and expand the activities that we had established in the Northeast, recognizing that this is not something that can really expand beyond proof of concept at this point because of the logistics and the distances that we're traveling with this material. We're hopeful that in reporting out in collaboration with the NOAA Marine Debris Program, that some of our experiences and the resources that we'll create with that experience can aid in the organization and collaboration of a wide variety of marine industry stakeholders as they're looking to understand what options exist for materials that are coming from end-of-life boats or abandoned and derelict vessels that are being collected from authorities. So moving into 2021, we do have goals to create some deliverables that will again provide guidelines around specific aspects of the recycling process, which is something that we've been trying to document over the last couple of years. So when we have a candidate boat, we work with boatyards and marinas within our membership to identify and really prepare boats for that salvage stage initially. Working with professional salvagers has been something that's really benefited the final quality of the recycled material collected. They have the equipment and the resources and the incentives necessary to really remove hazards and really focus on metal recovery, which is a big issue for us with our partners in the cement industry, trying to remove as much metal as possible. You'll know that we can't get every bolt and fastener out of an old hull, but to the extent that we can, trying to remove all hardware, engine components, anything that has scrap value, but also anything that can, again, help us get that non-ferrous, ferrous metal content down. And once we have a stripped hull, that material is crushed into chunks that I would say are 3 or 4 or 5 feet in length and width into a 30-yard container. So in the deconstruction process, we often get 4, 5 boats into a 30-yard container. And once those containers are full, we supply them to a construction and demolition debris recycling facility that has been vetted by our state's environmental agency to what's called pre-process this material down to a size that it can be used to introduce into the kiln. That was a step that was really something that our cement industry partners wanted us to take on for a number of reasons, one of which was sort of the economics, which I'll get into, but having that pre-processing stage is really critical to ensuring that what we did collect could be used by the end user. And that was something that, again, dealt with some material separation, but was really focused on capitalizing on existing resources and equipment that was present at this facility, in particular, a horizontal grinder that's mobile and often used for building demolition, but in this case was kind of serving as our primary processing tool. And then once we had 18-ton increments that we were able to ship, that material was delivered and blended at the kiln facility with a variety of other non-hazardous solid materials that again kind of have the same chemical composition and thermal energy value that the facility needs to maintain its production outputs. So this is an image of what the material looks like after that pre-processing stage. You'll notice that there's foam core, balsa wood, other things that aren't necessarily fibrous or polymer resin based. We went through a pretty extensive laboratory analysis process with GeoCycle to determine that things like bottom paint and other ancillary components wouldn't have a detrimental impact to not only the value of the material and its implementation, but the considerations around environmental health and safety and the management of this material as it relates to workers in the facility. Obviously, not a lot of hands-on interaction with this kind of material, even though it's classified as non-hazardous, but dusting and fibrous dust were a big concern for us, and we had to implement some misting and dust control strategies to get to this point. When it comes to our experience with cost, obviously that's the biggest impediment to expanding these practices right now. Unfortunately, the tipping fees at the landfill per ton are still less than what it costs to deviate this material and prepare it in a way that a cement industry end user can take advantage of it. It's important to note that we are paying the cement industry to utilize this stuff, just like we would pay a landfill to bury it with a tipping fee. But that kiln fee is really a drop in the bucket when you look at the amount of cost that was dedicated to the shredding stage. And almost 60% of that total cost for an average vessel that's gone through our program has been stuck in that shredding stage. One of the reasons that's the case is there's really a limited number of options when it comes to businesses, outfits that have the regulatory permissions, as well as the infrastructure, the environmental health and safety standards required to do this job in a meaningful way. I think that very early in our development of the partnership network, we were approached by a number of folks that felt they could do that stage for cheaper, felt that they could do it more quickly or more efficiently. But in reviewing those options with our state environmental agency, we learned very quickly that there's a lot of other considerations to make when you're looking at someone conducting that stage and what that means for the rest of the partners involved down the line. So shredding remains to be the biggest challenge, not only for the Northeast, but for the United States when it comes to this kind of operation. In Europe, where this has really taken off, there are dedicated facilities, dedicated pieces of equipment that businesses have invested in to handle not just boats, but a whole spectrum of end-of-life products, including wind turbine blades, automotive manufacturing scraps, you name it, trying to really build that critical volume so that the economics are a little more palatable for all of the industries that are dealing with this solid waste challenge. Moving forward, in addition to trying to report out to the marine industry on what the opportunities are for collaboration right now, we're really trying to, again, demonstrate that this outlet is a chance for mobilization, not only with boats and abandoned derelict vessels and end-of-life boats, but with fiberglass as a whole. Boats can kind of serve as a foot in the door and get the ball rolling, but they're not going to be able to exist as a stream indefinitely alone. It's just not feasible in terms of volume. It's not feasible in terms of the amount of money it costs to maintain the infrastructure and partnerships necessary to do this work. So thinking about how the composites industry is going to be collaborating and working together in the years to come to develop those critical connections and collaborations so that people can access partners and infrastructure and resources that will help them deal with ensuring that the material they collect from a composite standpoint is managed sustainably and is not buried indefinitely in a landfill. So that includes working at the federal level from a legislation standpoint. Every state is different, I think, as you guys are realizing with some of the ADV legislation and programming, and trying to figure out what kinds of programming and legislation components can benefit a transition to recycling. and also really recognizing that the cement kiln is the first step on the journey here. This is by no means a silver bullet solution. It is the one that has the most volume and accessibility right now for our industry and for others who are dealing with this kind of material, but it's not going to be the only option in the future. And ultimately, options for recycling will become more advanced with respect to kind of being able to close the loop and reintegrate resin and fiber in composites as a secondary life cycle in some constructive form. Right now, those technologies exist, but the economic feasibility is the real challenge for getting to scale. So we are well aware of those advancements. We are well aware of the folks that are working in the United States and around the world to adapt and try new things with this material. And we know that as those solutions begin to evolve and surface, the legwork that we're doing now to develop networks, logistic partnerships, build that sort of supply chain, will be ready to plug into those solutions as they come online and as their requirements shift. So with that, I'll just say that it's a very detailed topic. I think with respect to your subcommittees on funding, policy, removal, I'd be happy to kind of meet separately and get into this topic on those fronts. But again, happy to take the time now to address any initial questions. It's, again, a heavy topic and something we've been working on for a number of years. So if there are specific interests, happy to address them here or offline where appropriate.
Wow, great. Thank you. That's just like terrific information. We do have one question in the chat box. How do costs compare for fiberglass recycling versus landfill disposal for end-of-life vessels?
I can only speak to the tipping fees that we're seeing in Rhode Island, but we are close. Right now, it's about $250 a ton to tip any kind of boat-related waste in Rhode Island. And if you look at kind of the breakdown over an entire boat, that might end up being something around $1,000. With a boat that's maybe 1.5 tons or 2 tons. We are for that 21-foot, 1.5 ton sailboat right around the $1,250 mark for start to finish. That's, again, specific to Rhode Island, specific to our network partners, specific to some of the support that we've received at the state level. It does not sort of reflect as a true number across the board. I think that in many cases, you can expect some of these recycling efforts to hit sort of the $45 to $50 a foot mark. I know that's more of a appropriate measurement for some of the marine industry folks that are looking at this process. So tough to say what those numbers are because a lot of our economics are so specific to the context that we've been dealing with in Rhode Island. But unfortunately, we're still above that tipping fee sort of baseline for the Northeast. But we recognize that that's going to change. In Rhode Island, our State Resource Recovery Corporation is raising those rates every year in an attempt to divert material away from the facility. So I suspect similar policies may evolve elsewhere, although Pennsylvania is always close by and there's a lot of space there. So we have to be considerate of variables that impact each state in a unique way.
Great. You mentioned too that the material, once shredded, is analyzed. Are all fiberglasses the same? I mean, have you found that you have to analyze every single load, or can you make some assumptions?
It's a great question. Anybody that deals with composites and boat building knows that across 40 years of design and construction, you're going to see a real variance in resin content, in resin makeup, in the quantity of the glass fiber mat, in the shifts between sort of ancillary construction materials. So looking at vinyl ester, polyester, epoxy, we've done our best to really go out in the pilot project and capture a representation of that legacy fleet at all ages, at all stages and sizes, and have tried to show our cement industry partners that there is a widespread variability in sort of the makeup of this material. That being said, through our analysis and through the work that we've done up until this point, we've not had any loads turned away. We've not had any major red flags pop up from a laboratory assessment standpoint. So we know that that spectrum, while it can vary in value in terms of how impactful it is at the manufacturing level, it's acceptable and it will make its way through the process. Now we do have to be considerate of that value that we're providing to the cement industry. In addition to making sure that we don't have any red flags, we want to, as best we can, remain consistent in those values. And that's going to shift, especially when we're dealing with older boats that have been abandoned, derelict, left in the marine environment for long periods of time. And that's, again, where the larger composite spectrum comes into play. How can you offset some of those lesser values that you might see in an end-of-life product or an abandoned and derelict product with manufacturing scraps or virgin materials that might be able to boost some of those properties? So it's a balancing act, and it's something that ultimately we have to be very mindful of. But so far, what we've been able to collect, and I do feel confident that we've got a real representation of the legacy fleet, that's been able to flow through.
Great, thank you. Another question that's in the chat box: do you tend to encounter asbestos in small recreational vessels? And if so, does it alter your handling process, or does your process account for that?
So I do know that when our salvage partners make that initial assessment of a candidate vessel, hazardous materials are a huge aspect of that initial overview. And in boats that do have asbestos, I know that it's potential. It's not always common, and when it is, it's not always clear where it is or in what quantity it's in. That is something that we try to avoid. And so I know that there have been boats that our salvage partner has turned down for whatever reason, often in relation to conditions and materials. If a boat has had gas in the tank for a long time, that's going to be another consideration around hazards. So there are means and ways to deal with those things. Right now, with our limited capacity, we do try to be mindful of the fact that some of those boats are a little more that we can chew at some point with the costs associated there. But when it comes to handling those boats down the line, those tools are there, and those resources are there. And I think that from a marine industry standpoint, the expertise that goes into handling a boat and some of that more hazardous materials, it's something that we've relied on the industry to teach us and make sure that that's part of the lessons we're passing down.
Okay, great, thank you. Two other questions. Actually, there's more. Boat manufacturers, are they on board or supportive of this effort? And you mentioned legislative changes that would make this more feasible, more sustainable. Do you have legislative guidelines that you've already prepared? So industry and legislative guidelines.
Yeah, so I guess with the legislative guidelines, I'll answer that first. We know that throughout the country, with respect to abandoned derelict vessel legislation, with respect to vessel turn-in programs, there's a lot of effort being placed and a lot of funding being placed on managing end-of-life boat materials. And unfortunately, those programs, those initiatives often deviate and sort of rely on the most accessible option, which is landfilling that material. By being able to demonstrate that there are in some regions, partners ready to go and ready to accept this material, we're hopeful that in places where legislation already exists, we're able to kind of plug in and translate some of the existing efforts to more sustainable practices, recognizing that that may require a funding increase, recognizing that that may require support from other agencies that may not normally be involved with marine debris or abandoned derelict vessel issues, folks that have authority in the waste management world and can help coordinate and identify partners with some of those critical capabilities and permissions. So looking for, I think, places where existing state legislation, especially around ADVs, can help us inform the changes that could translate to a recycling commitment. Here in Rhode Island, for example, we have an abandoned derelict vessel fund that is supported by a surcharge on all registered recreational boating fees, a $2 to $5 surcharge. That money goes into a fund that's supported by municipal agents that will petition for support and resources to remove boats. And part of the cost that the state's boaters are footing is the disposal of that boat in a landfill, unfortunately. And so, again, thinking about how a fund like that could be altered to support recycling, it's something that I think boaters want to see. I think many folks from a recreational boating standpoint don't want to see boats in landfills, don't want to see boats looked at as a marine debris or waste management challenge. And so there's motivation to take some of those existing tools and try and flip them in ways that will be effective. And at the same time, I will say we're working very closely with the folks at the NOAA Marine Debris Program and the folks at NOAA to really figure out how our experiences can inform a much larger, more informed national discussion. And I think that's something that we're very eager to see evolve in the months to come.
Great. But manufacturers, have you had talk?
Yes, thank you. So as I mentioned, Brunswick was one of our early supporters. Brunswick is the largest manufacturing group in the world. I think there's 12 or 13 different notable brands under their umbrella that have in one form or fashion looked at their role not only in managing the end of life situation, but thinking about extended producer responsibility and what they can do to incentivize the collection of boats and think about boats in the future as they're being made. How can materials and construction practices really support that disassembly and deconstruction phase at end of life? We want boats to be built as strongly as possible. We want to be able to add all the bells and whistles, but we don't think about what it's going to take all those bells and whistles off at the end of the day. And so by being more thoughtful and looking at some of the lessons we've learned on the back end, working with manufacturers, not only to get support for vessel collection, through dealerships and other parts of their network, but thinking about what those lessons mean long-term for life cycle design. That's something that's critical, and it's something that I think more and more boat manufacturers will begin to take on at a heavier level, not only to brand themselves and sort of put themselves ahead of competition, but to be ahead of those legislative efforts that we know are coming around extended producer responsibility, not just for boats, but any product that's created in the United States. So Brunswick, I think, is the greatest example of leadership on that front. They've taken a lot of some of our existing experiences and have tried to translate that into their own organization. So we're actively speaking with them about how that's unfolding. And I think that marine dealers have a potential role here, as manufacturers have demonstrated with potential to kind of be that collection point or that incentivizer to say, hey, if you have an old Boston whaler and you don't know what to do with it, stop by on our amnesty day and get a 10% rebate off on your next one. So manufacturers are thinking creatively about how they can support these objectives, while at the same time, I think, distinguishing themselves as stewards and folks that are thinking creatively about the challenge.
Great, thank you. Jeff, could you give us a time check on our agenda? Do we have time for a few more questions?
Right now, we right at 10:40. I think we're good. I think that 15 minutes included the Q&A. So Dorothy is next up.
Well, I think I'll just slip in one more question for Evan. I think this will be a quick one. The size range of the vessels that you work with.
Yeah, so I just saw another question too about the number of vessels we've done. At this point, it's about 60 vessels, and that's everything from the sailing school fleet of ADVs that was being retired, all the way to power and sailboats that are 45 to 50 feet ocean-going vessels. So we've really tried to capture that spectrum and leave no stones unturned when it comes to the makeup of the legacy fleet, knowing that 2 to 3% of recreational vessels around the country are sort of falling off registration rolls every year. We know that that's not just a 15-foot outboard. There's going to be a whole lot more when it comes to the makeup of that population. So again, that's the spectrum. We haven't gone above 50 feet yet, but who knows? I think the sky's the limit, obviously, with this process. It is more intensive the bigger you go, but the resources and I think the the approach stays the same overall.
Well, Evan, thank you so much. I think the subcommittees will probably take you up on your offer to have you come back and speak more in depth on their particular mandates. But thank you. This has been a real eye opener, and we invite you to stay for the rest of our meeting if you'd like. Now I'd like to turn it over to Jeff, who will introduce our next speaker, Dorothy.
Hey, thanks again, Evan. It's my pleasure to introduce Dorothy Deal with the Oregon State Marine Board. We had the pleasure of interviewing her and some of her colleagues back in December, right before Christmas. So she's been kind enough to provide some lessons learned. And Dorothy, if you're able to share your screen with your presentation, you are a co-host. If not,
Okay.
I can do that.
Okay, I have to admit I'm a little bit new to Zoom, so I will
Down at the bottom center.
do what I can here. So share screen. And
Yep, it's coming along.
There
Here we go.
does that look good to everybody? Okay.
Perfect.
Then I'll keep it so I can still see a couple faces so I feel like I'm talking to somebody. So I am Dorothy Deal with the Oregon State Marine Board. And one thing I will try to emphasize today is that a lot of times we get referred to as Oregon's ADV program, and we're just the Oregon State Marine Board's ADV program. There's a lot of other state agencies that see this as a big problem, and we collaborate with a lot of people. And that's actually one of the things that I'm the most proud and excited about is our relationships that we've built with other agencies. So I just want to be clear that this is just the Marine Board's program. So the Marine Board hosts most of the statutes that are related to abandoned and derelict vessels, which makes some amount of sense because we're the agency that titles and registers boats. So you could see us almost as the DMV of recreational boats, except we also are stewards of the environment and of our customers. And so we have a lot of programs that are outside of just the simple paperwork having to do with owning a boat. So the statutes that define abandoned and derelict boats are housed within our chapter in our Oregon Revised Statutes. And this surprises a lot of people when they see the definitions, because everybody who calls me to complain about an abandoned boat or a derelict boat, they're certain that they know what that means because these are words that we use. But abandoned, very simply stated, means a boat that is somewhere where it's not supposed to be. It's not authorized to be there, so it's abandoned. And it actually does not differentiate between a boat that is occupied, that has personal belongings in it, versus a boat that has been in one spot on the shore for 20 years. If the land manager or owner says that it's not authorized to be there, then it's abandoned. In a lot of cases, though, on state-owned submerged and submersible land, our Department of State Lands, which is an agency that we work closely with, they don't consider it to be unauthorized until it's been there for 30 days. And that's something that presents a challenge, but we also support it because we want our recreational boaters to be able to camp on the water, to boat transiently, to recreate, and to be able to utilize state lands, as everyone should be able to. And so being able to use state lands for up to 30 days is something that we're supportive of. But when it's a boat that's clearly a problem, it does present some challenges and definitely a lot of frustration for the people who call in and want to report the boats. Derelict boat is also maybe not as straightforward as a lot of people hope. We really have to be able to articulate that it is either already sunk or in imminent danger of sinking, like it is about to sink, or it's fully obstructing a waterway, which is very rare. It's endangering life or property, which honestly is pretty rare too, or that someone has documented repeated evidence of environmental hazards, which we don't want to wait that long. So we usually find a way to articulate that it's abandoned or derelict in another way. So as far as my agency, the Marine Board's role is we're kind of unique in that we do have a dedicated fund for this problem. And so that's probably why a lot of people look to us as the lead agency in Oregon. And we kind of push back against that a little bit because we're not sure that we, should be or want to be the lead agency on this issue. Because like I said, we really, really value our partners and we want to build those relationships. But we do have authority in our statutes that from the money that we bring in registration fees and titles, we can scoop off $150,000 per biennium. So every 2 years, we can take $150,000 out of that revenue and put it toward ADVs. So it's not a per boat thing. So it's not like I can tell you, that we take $1 or $2 from every boat. It's the revenue might go up and down, but our limit of how much we can set aside for this problem is $150,000 currently. We like to reimburse other agencies for work related to this issue. Sometimes we will step in and go ahead and do the project ourselves. It just depends because we're statewide, we have this fund. And it was pretty much developed to reimburse our partner law enforcement agencies because we partner the county sheriff's office marine patrols in most of the counties in Oregon. And they were starting to see that this was a problem and it cost them a lot of money at the local level. So we wanted to be able to reimburse them. So that was the initial motivation behind having this fund. It has evolved a lot over the years to the point that now we have the authority to seize boats, just as any other public agency that has jurisdiction over the land or water where the boat is has the authority to use a seizure process to seize the boat under those same statutes that we use. And so we will now go out and do our own boat seizures. We'll collaborate with the Department of State Lands. Like I said, we participate in task forces, communicate with a lot of people. I'm very happy to be here today. This is really good for us too, to learn about the programs that other people around the country are doing. And then there's a couple specific programs that I'll talk about. This is something I won't go into detail, but there's a link there that if you feel like it and you want to go back and click on it and do some of your own research, this is a manual that I developed to help other public agencies, particularly our law enforcement partners, be able to navigate this whole process because I'm kind of the liaison for anybody in the state who wants to find out more about how to deal with these. So I went ahead and I put it in a manual that I thought was kind of easy to read and get through. So feel free to peruse that at your leisure. Wanted to put in a little bit about our costs related to ADVs. And I don't know how they might compare to other states, but we use a competitive bid process to have contractors go out and remove these vessels. And so we just have to assume that, the market is giving us the best price at any given time because we go out and we solicit bids usually for a couple of weeks at a time. And then typically go with the lowest qualified bidder. I mean, they can't just be anyone, they have to be qualified, but obviously we're definitely trying to keep costs low. So this is just an example of a few projects that I've been involved in just in the past couple of years since I've been with the agency and what they cost. But as this slide points out, this is simply the bill that we pay to the contractor at the end. So this doesn't get into the law enforcement investigation of who may have left this boat. It doesn't get into going out and scouting and taking inventory and recording information, the admin time that it takes to post a request for proposals through our state website, any of that overhead. This is simply the check that we write at the end of the project. This one, however, this could have easily been in that same group with all those others because it wasn't an exceptionally big boat. But because of how this boat sank right next to this very nice brand new dock that our agency actually helped pay for with grant money, in order to pull this boat out without completely destroying that dock, ended up being $40,000. So that's just kind of like a little scare tactic that I put in my presentation to show everyone how variable it really is. It had very little to do with the boat itself or the materials or anything. It was simply the complexity of this removal. And that was the lowest price that this Parks Department could get. And we were not able to contribute the full amount because it was toward the end of us spending most of our funding for the biennium. And so we contributed $4,000 to this, and that's all we could do. And so this county parks department was stuck trying to figure out how to get insurance to pay the rest, how to, use emergency funds and whatnot. This slide illustrates what I consider to be a little bit of a concern. Like I said, this fund of money that I have is for the entire state, and abandoned vessels occur throughout the state, but you can see that most of the money and attention is going to just a few counties. Multnomah County is where we have our two biggest rivers, the Willamette and the Columbia, come together in Portland. And we have helped with 38 abandoned and derelict boats just in that one county. And then we're starting to see a huge uptick in the number of boats that are turning up downstream in Columbia County. We haven't contributed to as many removals in that county yet, but I'm seeing it become, a hot spot. And then on the coast, we get abandoned vessels, but kind of, a different style of vessel. It's more like larger boats, retired, fishing vessels on the coast. So these are just some more pictures of examples of, I guess, what I consider our typical boats that we deal with a lot. I see a lot of fiberglass sailboats, like a 30-foot fiberglass sailboat gets reported to me, like just on a very regular basis. If somebody's calling about an ADV, I can pretty much guess if it's inland, it's going to be a 30-foot fiberglass sailboat. This is a specific program I wanted to highlight just real quick. This is something that we're doing with the NOAA Marine Debris Program. It's called Avrap, Abandoned Vessel Removal Assistance Program. And I know that in Virginia, you all have Clean Marina also. I can't remember who administers the Clean Marina program there, but in Oregon, the Oregon State Marine Board administers it. Voluntary program for marina owners to try to reduce their impact, make sure that they're being sustainable and environmentally friendly. That's our only kind of in with marinas. We don't regulate marinas. That's the Department of State Lands leases land to marinas. So they have some contracts with marinas. We don't have a way to make a marina do anything. It's all voluntary. So with this program, we're basically offering to come in and remove their old, legacy abandoned vessels. And in kind of return, as like part of a partnership, they will implement some suggested management practices that we have that we will insert into their Clean Marina plan. And so that includes things like requiring insurance for the vessels, requiring that the vessels have current state registration, and just checking up on the vessels to make sure that they're in good condition and still operate and that there's a current owner for it. Another thing that we're doing that sounds incredibly simple, and we're finding out that it actually takes quite a bit of coordination, which was surprising to me because when my colleague talked about it, honestly thought, so you're going out with the sheriff and you're making sure people are current on registration. It sounds really easy. But what it actually includes is a lot of schedule coordination and working with ports and marinas to gain access to their facilities and earning their trust and making sure that they understand that we're not trying to punish a marina by coming in and making sure that their customers are current. It has, a lot to do with when a vessel is not currently registered. That's automatically a red flag for us, because one thing I've noticed in all the boats that we've removed is they're never current on registration. In the past 2 years, the average amount of time that an abandoned or derelict boat has spent out of compliance is at least 5 years. And so by going into the marinas and making sure that they have current tags, we're not only protecting our revenue stream and kind of, justifying to our lawmakers any future requests that we make, we're also making sure that somebody's paying attention to that boat and is interacting with that boat. And if they're not, then what can we do to get that boat into a better place? So I promised Jeff I wouldn't go through all of these because I know that we don't have a lot of time. But if you do have time to go back, this was my way of showing our board members the type of phone calls that I get on a weekly basis, because I get a lot of them. And I don't know if that's true for all of you, whether you're getting a lot of complaints from people, but it feels like here in Oregon, this topic is on everyone's minds. It's in the media, it's in the legislature, it's on social media. It's a big hot topic right now. And so I will just quickly go through these to give you a taste of what you might want to go back and look at. But I get calls from marinas, people who, end up with an abandoned boat at their own personal facility, lots and lots of fishermen who are upset about the issue, people who see all the abandoned boats and want to rescue them and take them home. I get calls from the Coast Guard, fire departments, sheriff's offices, who are frustrated with the fact that they have to initiate a lot of search and rescue missions on boats that turn out to have been sunk for a long period of time. Someone who, sold a boat years ago, and now they're getting a message from me saying, hey, we seized your boat. And they didn't realize that they were supposed to notify us. Just like when you sell a car, you have to notify your DMV. People skip this step a lot. We have a lot of people who've been storing a boat and they want to clean up their property and get rid of that boat. And then they find out that it's very expensive, or they don't have the ability to transport it. We get welfare check calls. People want to know, they haven't seen this guy out on his boat in a long time. They want us to go take a look. And then we have tons and tons and tons of these people who are just absolutely fed up that this problem exists and it's getting worse, not better. And they reported a boat to me weeks ago and it's still there. And then I don't know if this is true in your state, but here, social issues and, houselessness and, the perception of crime or the actual existence of crime, transient camps on land, they're all intertwined with this issue. And so I get a lot of calls from people who are upset that they feel that their access to public water is impeded by people who are basically living on the water. So I guess I actually went through that pretty quick. So hopefully we'll have time for a lot of questions, because I want to know what you guys think is actually important. So that's kind of just an intro to what I do regularly. But I know some of the questions that Jeff wanted me to consider for today is the extent of the problem. How close are we to solving it? Well, the extent of the problem, on some days it feels overwhelming, enormous, impossible. And I have to remind myself that a lot of times that's because one big news story came out and everybody's fired up about it. Or, maybe there wasn't a lot of news that week. And so people are now using that time to call me to tell me how upset they are about this problem. But it is a big problem, and I see it creeping into areas where I didn't see it before. And that's pretty troubling, because it's one thing to see a lot of these in an urban area where you're kind of used to it. And I mean, that's kind of sad that you can get used to it, but we see a lot of it, down in Portland, and on the coast. But when you start seeing it up in, the more mountainous areas, when people are dumping boats off the edge of a cliff in a pristine natural area, or in, like, we had one that was left in an area where somebody had to get in there during high water and leave the boat. And it was in an area that was really culturally important for some local tribes. And they were very concerned about how the removal or the continued presence of that boat might impact some of their important artifacts. So that's pretty disappointing to feel like the problem is getting bigger despite all of our efforts. And as far as how close we are to solving it, that's not even possible for me to answer, but I can tell you that we're not close to solving it right now. But there's a lot of agencies that are making it a priority and trying to be creative and realizing that what we've been doing for the past few years isn't taking care of it. So we've got to figure out some things. And so we're very aware of like what Evan is doing in Rhode Island. I get people forward me articles about Rhode Island all the time because they're so excited because it gives them hope. Because a big part of the problem is it's expensive to get rid of a boat and there aren't alternatives to the landfill for people. And so we're really excited about everything that they're doing. As far as our funding, it's clearly not enough, but funding is not the only issue. It's not the only barrier. And so while additional funding at some point is going to be necessary, we don't want to give people the, false idea that if we just had a bunch of money, there wouldn't be abandoned boats everywhere. Because part of the problem is there's plenty of supply of these abandoned boats. It's pretty easy. And we absolutely don't want to blame this problem whatsoever on the houseless community. They're just experiencing it just like the rest of us are. But it's pretty easy for them to obtain an old boat from somebody who, either doesn't know how to get rid of it or doesn't feel like getting rid of it responsibly, especially marinas who tend to just want to give them away. Somebody stops paying their mortgage, and so the marina just kind of pushes the boat out, and that's incredibly frustrating. And we don't really see that going down right now, but we hope that with our NOAA partnership and with the enhanced registration checkups, that is going to improve. As far as enforcement, I'll take some questions about that because I'm not sure exactly what to say about enforcement. We work with our county sheriff's departments to try to hold somebody accountable. But like I said, people don't report the sale of their boat, and a boat might change hands 4 or 5 times or, be abandoned for a long time. And then somebody picks it up again, and then figuring out who's actually responsible for that is difficult. And then what we're still struggling with, I would say that the houselessness problem in Oregon is a struggle for everybody, and we're not equipped to solve that problem or offer people better resources or alternative housing. And so we definitely do not want to go in and be policing homelessness and transient living. And so that's kind of tough for a lot of people because they want us to basically go and seize a boat that somebody's currently living on, because living on that boat in that area is violating a law, but we don't see that as our role. And then for how the public and state local government perceives ADV versus marine debris, I think it depends a lot. The reason why people get especially upset about boats, I think, is they say, well, it has a HIN on it. It has a registration number. So surely you can go find the owner and hold them accountable for it. So it's a little bit different than when a dock breaks free or there's trash in the water. People see a boat and they think, Well, you should be able to identify who that is and very quickly go out and punish that person and take care of the problem. And they just don't understand that it's much, much more complicated than that. But in some ways, I think that does give us an advantage, because there are docks that break free, or there are docks that are deteriorating and people just shove them off. And, that cost just absolutely has to be borne by whoever decides to remove that. So I'll be quiet for a minute if you folks just want to try to ask some questions, or I can go back to anything that you felt like I went over too quickly.
Hey, real quick, thanks so much, Dorothy. This was excellent. I will read off a couple of questions from the chat real quick. We are running a little bit behind, and we got to get into the marine debris reduction plan. But this is really great information. So if folks don't mind running over about 5 minutes here. So one question is, how do you qualify the bidder for the wreck removal? I mean, just how you vet them. Is that a pretty simple process, or?
Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff. I missed the first part of that question.
Oh, how do you qualify or vet a bidder for wreck removal? A contract shortlist or what?
Okay, so that's something that we really do want to improve our process on, because right now I type up a request for proposals for every single project that I want to do, and I put it out there and I see who bids on it. And usually it's somebody that we already know. So we probably already have their insurance documents and references on file. Sometimes it's a new person, but we're repeating the process every single time. Part of the way that we vet them is just through what our own state, Department of Administrative Services procurement folks say we have to do. So they've kind of looked at risk and told us, what type of insurance these folks have to have. It mostly comes down to insurance, but we have them describe their experience and what type of equipment they have, how they protect the environment, how they keep their workers safe. And then a lot of it is kind of a judgment call on our part. We all look at it and kind of weigh the pros and cons. And if we have concerns, we follow up with them. And then maybe we have that contractor do what we think is a pretty simple job. And then we just kind of build up, a trust level and a confidence level with each of those contractors.
Awesome. Thank you. We got a couple more about costs, but I will make sure folks to follow up with Dorothy in an email and get that information, then add that to our meeting summary, because it might be a little longer discussion for that. So just one more real quick. Do you all remove totally submerged ADVs or just partially? Is there sort of a cutoff in what you can do jurisdiction wise or just cost wise?
Well, unfortunately and fortunately for me, we don't have like a matrix that we have to strictly follow that tells us what we can and can't remove. It's a lot of us just talking about it and prioritizing. And we care about the environment, but we mostly are thinking about how is this impacting our recreational boaters, because those are our customers. So if there's an environmental issue, then we look to our environmental partners like the Department of Environmental Quality and our Department of Fish and Wildlife, because they're the experts on that. We're looking at, is this a navigational issue? Is this a hazard? And if it's just completely sunk in deep water, there's a very good chance it's not going to rise to a priority level for us. So it's probably going to stay down there. And we're going to focus on, a different one that is about to sink or is more of a hazard for boaters.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And just thanks again for taking time. I know it was an early start for you up there in Oregon.
No problem.
And Katie, I'll turn it over to you to jump into this marine debris reduction plan that we're trying to work through and get some folks input. And that'll be the last thing on the agenda. Bingo. There we go. Katie, you're on mute.
Okay, so you didn't hear me earlier.
Nope.
So sorry. Right, so the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan was first written 6 years ago through a very big collaborative project, and we are now updating it, and abandoned and derelict vessels have been elevated in the updated plan to be one of the top 4 major goals. The others are consumer debris, that's your bottles and caps and cigarette butts and such, derelict fishing gear, microplastics, and then of course ADVs. The microplastic deep dive workshop will be tomorrow. If any of you are interested in getting involved with crafting our plan on dealing with microplastics and microfibers, please send me an email. But today what we want to do is take a look briefly at the actions that are in the updated plan and get your feedback. We're looking for your thoughts on how we can make the actions in the plan more specific, measurable, attainable, and relevant. And Jeff and I have, and others, a lot of this came from input from the NOAA Marine Debris Program. The structure of the abandoned and derelict vessel goal in the Virginia plan follows the same structure as the other major goals. We have, as you see here, 5 buckets, 5 strategies, and these pretty much mirror our subcommittee work. So we're very fortunate that in Virginia, we've already got a structure in place to deal with these. So the first strategy has a bunch of actions that will address prevention, education, and outreach. The second strategy will be looking at data gaps. What research and monitoring do we need? The third strategy is about proper disposal. The fourth is about removal. And then the fifth is about policy and management. So I wanted to point out too that the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan, while it is being developed by the Coastal Zone Management Program with assistance from Clean Virginia Waterways, we really see it as a roadmap for many, many, many partners. Everybody on this phone call hopefully will be able to contribute to the solutions. So our timeline, basically right now in March, we're gathering input. We're trying to fine tune the plan. We're asking that partners, organizations that want to take a leadership position on some of these actions, sign up between now and the 22nd of March. And then April, we're going to have public input. We will publish the draft plan and ask all people from various communities in Virginia to jump in and give us their thoughts. So now I'm going to shift to the actual plan. And this is a Google document, which we will share a link with you. And you can use the comment feature to make comments on any of these actions if you want to help us wordsmith it, or if you want to volunteer to be a leader on some of these actions. So in the time we have left, I'm going to just focus on the actions. These are things we've identified that should be done in the next 5 years. And I'd love your input. If you have a thought and you want to put it in the chat box, that's great too. We may not have time to talk about it now, but we want to capture your thoughts. So under prevention and education and outreach, the first action is about creating and distributing outreach products, fact sheets, educational materials, in order to encourage responsible boat ownership. And this says where we would share these materials: marinas, boat shops, boat shows. We definitely have a clean marina program, as Dorothy had mentioned, that's run by the Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences. So this is the first thought. And again, tomorrow our prevention and education and outreach subcommittee will be meeting, and perhaps they can add this to their agenda. Are they happy with this action, or would they like to make any additions to it? So I'll go on to the next one, but if anyone has thoughts, jump in briefly, because we want to respect our end time here. The second action under education and outreach and prevention is identify relevant local and state jurisdictions that address abandoned and derelict vessels. And we also want to be able to share information through the NOAA Marine Debris ADV Information Hub. We also, of course, have the Clean Virginia Waterways ADV website. So those are two actions. Again, tomorrow, perhaps our prevention committee will rephrase these or come up perhaps with a third action. Okay, I'm going to go on to monitoring. Monitoring, we already have a bit of a jump on this. Create and share an inventory of ADVs with federal, state, local authorities. And we have already started that. One possible new action that was just brought up possibly yesterday was to build and maintain a database containing the actual economic costs. This is actually a project that our intern Mitchell has already started to work on. We got some great information today from Dorothy and Evan about the cost of ADV removal. So this will probably become a new separate action, is to work on that. Also under the research is investigate and suggest solutions to removing administrative barriers. This is, of course, something that Anthony is working on with the policy paper. What are the barriers that, and how can they be modified so that it's easier to find owners or remove abandoned and derelict vessels? So I'll stop there briefly and see if anyone has thoughts or comments about the actions I just went over, which are under prevention and education and under research and monitoring. Okay, I hear nothing yet, so I'm going to continue. There's some actions that we've got under proper disposal and infrastructure. The first is identify funding opportunities and contact information for disposal, hauling, and vessel recycling, and then share this with the marine debris community. I'm going to pause here to mention one thing that we might want to do with this section of the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan, is the possibility of thinking of derelict vessels in at least two categories. The one category being recreational vessels, and the other category being commercial. It sounds from our earlier conversations that the processes will be different. Finding the owner of a sailboat that's registered in Virginia is probably going to be different than a commercial vessel or vehicle. I'm sorry, vessel was correct. That is not registered in Virginia, and of course the costs would be much higher. So we'll probably be discussing that over the next few days, of dividing derelict vessels into those two categories. Also under proper disposal is identify fiberglass recycling or other sustainable vessel disposal alternatives, which we took the first step today by hearing from Evan in Rhode Island. So I'll pause there. Any other disposal and infrastructure actions you think we should add to this plan, things that we'll work on the next 5 years? Okay. Again, if you have thoughts, you can email them, share them in the chat. And this is not the only chance to look at this plan. This is just the first time. We will be sharing this once it gets edited a bit. Then under removal, the action that we have is to actually remove ADVs that local, state, and federal agencies deem priorities. This, of course, is going to be based on the funding and the law and policy issues. And then in the strategy that deals with policy and management, we might change this to policy, laws, and management, because it sounds like we're moving towards looking at some legislative solutions. But the first action here is document successful techniques and legislative approaches of at least 5 agencies to share lessons learned. And I think this sounds like it's going to be a big chunk of the white paper that Anthony is working on. So that's why you notice here that we say by the end of 2022 instead of 2025, which is the end of the 5-year time frame for this document. And then the last action under policy and management is analyze existing legislation and policies to provide specific legislative and policy suggestions to elected officials and policymakers. Again, got a great jump on that and can't wait to see it in May, right? So Anthony, I'll put you on the spot just a bit. Do you think that these 2 actions under policy And are sufficient, or would you like to see any additions?
So I actually lead with a question of my own first. So I'm definitely planning on having, I think 5, at least 4 states right now, and I can certainly try to add some local agencies and some federal stuff to it. I'm not quite sure what would be successful techniques. I'm planning on just kind of highlighting what other states are doing, and maybe, you know, I could kind of give my opinion on whether I think they're successful or not, but I don't know if we have like a set standard on what we want, you know, a successful program would be.
Excellent point. It could be too that the programs that you'll be speaking to in the other states have already done some analysis of effectiveness or how they are measuring success. So yeah, I see your point. It may not be up to Virginia to determine if other states' programs are successful. Hopefully they've got some measurements of that. But certainly an analysis, yeah, that would be great in your white paper.
And then, sorry, to answer your actual question you asked, I mean, that looks fine to me, and I can certainly let you know if something changes as I'm writing. I want to add something there.
Okay, great. Thank you. You'll notice too that in this column here, we list partners, entities that will be working on this. And we took the initiative to add this work group on all of the marine debris or all the ADV actions because it looks like this work group is taking on each of these actions. So we will not be looking to list every member of the ADV work group under each of these actions in these charts, but we will be listing the members in the appendix to this document. One of the things too, and this goes to Anthony's point, I'm going to go back up to the top of this document. Each of the actions also has, how are we going to track success? How are we going to measure achievement? And this will definitely take a little bit of thinking. I think the plan is that Jeff and I will talk about this, come up with recommendations, but we want to make sure that how we measure success is based on something tangible, measurable, that has to do with reduction in the number of abandoned vessels, either through prevention or through removal. So this, for example, number of outreach products created will probably not stay there, because I think we all know that we can come up with 10 great posters and brochures, but if they're not effective, then that's not a meaningful measurement of success. But certainly the number of ADVs being reduced over the next 5 years, that would be a measure of some success. So any thoughts? That's just a real brief overview. And again, you'll have opportunity to contribute through Google Docs and through emails. And we will also do one-on-one conversations. If you really want to get down and talk in detail about one of these actions, either Jeff or I could, spend a few minutes on the phone with you.
Yep. Thanks, Kate. I'm just reading at the chat here. Neil Sturman's mentioning we should also address metal, aluminum, ADVs in addition, I guess, fiberglass that was discussed earlier, and it seems to have a good process in North Carolina. So adding that to maybe a investigation and best practices for recycling. It's part of the removal.
Okay, great. I'm just going to make a note right now here. Might move later. Okay.
And as Katie mentioned, this will happen. The policy stuff will happen probably first, along with the funding, and then some of these subcommittees will kind of hang around and develop kind of on the back end, the education part. So certainly we want to get these things done for just everyone's sake here. The sooner the better, but the strategy does provide kind of a long-term future of that, 2025 type of plan. So once we get the most important stuff done, we still want to kind of keep our nose to the grindstone and have that long-term plan until it's time for the next update. But this will also, we're looking to have a policy outcome, whether that is proposed legislation or just guidance or best practices. And we have sort of a requirement with NOAA that's funding what we call a Section 309 strategy, is that it does need to result in at least one enforceable policy for that overall strategy. So it looks like we're off to a good start here with folks. So I just wanted to add that. Any questions? I got 2 housekeeping items if no one has anything to add before we kind of close here.
I think we might be ready to close.
Okay, well, real quick, folks, if you're still on the line, we had a call in 757-232-4843. Could you let me know who you are so I can include you in the attendees? See, they might be on mute. I can unmute them. Should be. Okay, well, we have someone at 757-567-1113. That anyone can respond? Okay. And then someone is SSC 37392. Either rename yourself or just let me know who that is. All right, well, I'll just add 3 unidentified speakers, but we'll have the total number. So we got some great group of folks here today. So
they're adding themselves in the chat.
Oh, they are? Oh,
They
great.
are.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. I will make sure you're included. Julie, Renee. So yeah, we're thinking that our next work group meeting, the last one, as I said earlier, was January 5th. This one's today, and then the next one would probably be May, unless we think that there'd be some urgent work in the middle. But as I said earlier, the subcommittees are really doing the lifting on this research, and we're really making a lot of great progress. So we anticipate having March subcommittee meetings, April subcommittee meetings, and then just having one overall work group meeting catch up in early May. I would recommend that as a path going forward. But does anyone have any objections to that or a suggestion for strategy? We'll also have a little more progress on the white paper too, and the inventory.
I guess just one thing, I don't want people to schedule around me, but my semester will be wrapping up sometime in early-ish May. So, I think the paper will be mostly finished at that point. And I'll kind of be going into finals. We'll try to make myself available for a meeting as well to kind of, I'll be in all the subgroups as well, but to make myself available for these, for our next big team meeting.
Awesome. Thanks so much. All right. Well, anything else? I think we're right here on time. Closing at 11:30. Katie, anything else?
No, except thank you for your continued enthusiasm about this, and we will post a recording of this meeting on the Clean Virginia Waterways website probably tomorrow, and you can watch it again if you wish. But thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And let's sign out. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, Neil.
Bye.